All right, Santhosh, it's great to be with you today. Thank you for accepting this interview.
Yeah. It's great to be here as well. And thank you. Thank you.
Let me start with this first question. What made you want to pursue architecture?
Initially, I actually wanted to pursue automotive engineering, automotive designing. That's why my undergrad was first engineering, but I didn't quite like the way it's taught in India. So I kind of quit it, and I was looking for another profession to pursue. I think architecture was then evident to me that it was much more broader, with much more lot of scope than automotive designing. So that's how I ended up being an architect.
Interesting. And how has your understanding of architecture evolved since you first started your journey?
It's evolved a lot. To be honest, it's evolving every day. To be honest, that is how it should be. Or if your idea of architecture isn't evolving, I don't think you're learning anything new. So if that is not happening for you, you should introduce yourself to new ideas. So to sort of set your understanding of architecture, so it evolves. It should constantly evolve.
Great. What is the most unexpected or surprising thing you've learned so far at GSAPP?
Unexpected or surprising thing. It was actually in Mark Wigley's class. He was talking about the influence of genealogy in architecture. I think Shumi was also mentioning in our midterm reviews that how much influence certain architects have had on this profession. For example, Philip Johnson or Le Corbusier. Not only them, but these people are also teaching institutions, and they're molding students' ideas of architecture. And sometimes these ideas aren't great, they're very narrow and only cater to certain segments of people. For example, Philip Johnson was one. It was great learning about it through Mark Wigley, which is very surprising for me, the kind of influence that it has on our profession.
Interesting. And is there, would you say, one fact or one event that you encountered so far at GSAPP that made you rethink the way what was your initial thought on the profession of architecture? It can be an anecdote. It can be.
Yeah, I think it's plain and simple. I think it's the transcaler approach that Andres put forth as a dean of this college. I think it's been so far so much influential. But there is still room for other ideas in this institution. The idea of being critical is still a central part of GSAPP. I think it is for us to pick and evaluate and critically analyze these ideas.
I agree. Interesting. What are some of the major challenges you faced so far in your architecture career, and how did you overcome them?
Major challenge. Architecture is always a field that you can always easily conform to because you have an established idea of precedents, and breaking them is very challenging. For example, the idea of invention in an architecture is very difficult. We've been practicing architecture for 400 years as a profession, and the idea of invention is very crucial, I think so. The way the profession moves forwards, I think that is most challenging. I think Ramikulas also mentions it's so rare for an architect to invent something new. So that is the most challenging part in architecture.
And any challenges you've personally faced, would you say, since you actually started your career as a practicing architect or as someone who's constantly learning more and more about how to redefine architecture?
Yeah. I think there are certain limitations and freedom in architecture. Especially, there's a lot of freedom in an academic setting, whereas there are a lot of limitations when you're practicing architecture. The translation from your academic thinking to a professional practice is most challenging. There are only few architects who are both teaching and they're practicing, and they're also translating their academic ideas or academic ideas that belong in an academic realm to a build project. I think that translation is very crucial.
Yeah, and I think we see a lot of this at GSAPP actually, and that's why I think it's great, because we see a lot of teachers who are able to actually apply
it
exactly, and the real world, which is something also for me, for example, that I have not seen before, either in my undergraduate experience or even before when I lived in Beirut.
To just add on that, I think, there are certain architects who applied it, but there are certain architects who couldn't apply it, but that doesn't undermine their these professionals, this notion of calling it's a paper practice.
Yeah.
No, but I think there is true value in it also, even if it doesn't get translated.
Yeah.
You can still, the project can still remain on this discourse, and it can continue to inspire. It can work another 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. One example I can just throw off is this work of Super Studio. They've not done any build project. Their practice is not meant to be built, but it still continues to influence, question a lot of our
Archigram also, yeah, as well. Yeah, it's super interesting. Yeah, and I think somehow we're kind of coming back to this because I think for years, maybe even after, like during modern movement and after it, there was a period of time where we thought we were so certain about things and how to define architecture. And I feel like lately we've been putting all of those principles into question.
Architecture is kind of like a slow profession. It takes time for the cracks to appear, and it takes time for the cracks to disappear also. So it's not a single architectural project. It's sort of generational in that sense.
What's the biggest lie you've been told about becoming an architect?
Lie.
Have you ever been told a lie?
Yeah. Especially in my graduate years, the notion of conformity of architects, architects are meant to do this. And to think in an opposite way, like in an academic setting, people tend to think that architect is the one who's, designing the buildings. This idea of one person or a practice influencing, that is actually a lie. Because in practice, that is not the case. Although that is a case that we would ideally want it to be, the architect's role is sort of reduced in a small fraction, that you have other participants that happening, structural engineers, MEP, the client, other sort of disciplines sort of also merging. So that is one lie about architecture, that we are just one entity that's responsible for the design of the buildings, but truly it is not.
Yeah, and I think here also, we've been exposed to a lot of architects who've really started working very actively with the community in which they are actually willing to serve. And I thought that also that concept is also really interesting, because very often architects kind of live in their own bubble and they kind of want to impose their agenda on a client. And I feel like when you sort of have this merged work between them, when you have the architect actively working with the clients, and I'm not only going to say with the client, but also with the community they're actually trying to serve, this usually creates a much stronger architecture project.
I think you're bringing an important point in. Like, you're right. The answer that I was giving you is this conventional practice, and your role is reduced. But on the other hand, when you're working with the community, that brings a whole new equation.
Yeah,
that has much more potential for architects to truly realize there. And that sort of connects us to the direct users, and instead of having all these other people influencing it.
Yeah, I agree.
Working with community is such a great idea.
It's a great thing. If you could bulldoze one famous building built by any architect, which one would it be?
Yeah, this idea of bulldozing is not new in architecture.
Yes.
You might have heard the story of Howard Rourke from Fountainhead.
Yes.
He actually bulldozed his own building. And I recently came to know that, Bernard Shumi, I was reading Bernard Shumi's work, and in an interview, like he said, he will bulldoze his Park Delaware project if people are conforming to a single meaning for the project. The project, he meant the project to have multiple meanings for the user to interpret the building as his own thing. And he was saying if people have one consensus meaning for the project, he will bulldoze it. Yeah, I like the idea of bulldozing buildings.
Is there anyone in particular you think you would bulldoze?
Not bulldoze, modify, perhaps.
Yeah.
I don't believe the idea of the sanctity of buildings to be just preserved. I don't think it is meant to be that way. I think buildings are built to be built on, bulldozed or modified as people see fit.
I would love to bulldoze the vessel
Yeah.
at Hudson Yards.
Yeah.
I think that would be a pretty interesting act. Specifically, that I did a very thorough investigation and analysis for my mid review, where I actually really tried to show through my drawings the process of how it went from public site to a private site, and all of the processes that happened under the table. So I think, for such a case like that, where there's so much that happens under the table, but not much that happens on top, I think the act of dismantling can become very, very interesting.
Yeah.
And somehow, for some reasons, also, I still remember, when I was a kid, it was the beginning of the 2000s, and then Beirut was still getting built. And I still remember those buildings where people just starting adding one layer on top of the other, on top of the other, on a structure that was kind of already destroyed or dismantled. And so I thought it was a very, very interesting thing to actually see those layers add up and to see how this building comes back to life in its own way. And architecturally, I think that the process is very interesting.
The idea of bulldozing is nice, but what do we do with the debris is also, how do we use it as a building material? Demolition of a building is also one thing. You can also demolish ideas, the conventional way of buildings. I think that would be much more, that would be like a liberating thing.
Yeah.
To demolish ideas.
And I think when we think about demolition, we always think about the structure, but we don't really think about like all the memories that happened in that place. So I always thought it would be extremely interesting one day to be able to record through the life of a building all the memories and all the instances that actually happened. Because I think it's really, in a building, when you talk about architecture, it's really about the moments and the emotions you feel when you're in a certain place at a certain time.
Sometimes demolition of building is always happening, voluntary or involuntary. For example, war, the kind of devastation that it puts on the city and people is also something we must also think about.
Yeah.
And buildings are sort of becoming the pseudo targets for sort of painful too.
If you could have designed one iconic building differently, what would you change?
Yeah, there are many actually. But by the term of iconic, it also brings the idea of collective. I think I would like to be, I would like the idea to be a collective idea, just for the fact that it's an iconic building, and that would be an interesting idea for me. Competitions could be one way.
Yeah.
Thinking.
We're approaching the last question. What are your career plans after graduating from GSAPP?
Yeah, before coming to GSAPP, I had a career plan. I want to work, I want to start my own practice. But now I'm sort of, after GSAPP, I'm seeing a lot of these other ideas. I'm in sort of, the flux state of, I'm thinking, but ultimately I want to start my own practice or work with another practice, whatever medium. So, yeah.
Do you think you have any set plans already in your mind, or you think you're at the stage where you're more into an explorative phase where you kind of want to try new things? You still don't exactly know what you want to do, but you just have a certain idea about it. At which stage you think you are in terms of
starting a practice, or
yeah, maybe just not even that, but I would say like more like, do you see yourself already opening your own practice? Do you see yourself wanting to work at an architecture office for some years and then do that? Do you even see yourself like here in the States, or you think you're gonna go back to your hometown or try to be back and forth?
I definitely like to practice, whether it's an office or my own thing. I think I still have time, but there are also other modes where you can practice architecture, or not even practice another thing. Like architects isn't just a single domain. You can teach. You can, teaching is also a very good where you are sort of establishing your own discourse. You can also research.
I've noticed you're also very interested in architectural research. So
yeah, a lot of people juggle all these things very much. They do research, they teach. For example, another person that I would like to mention uh, is my boss. His name is Samir Podara. He juggles between all these roles. He teaches, he does research, especially on the city of Mumbai. He also runs a practice. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, you can do everything.
And we approach our last question. Any advices you would give to a high school student wanting to pursue architecture?
A high school student. Okay. There are certain preconceived notions of architecture that are, you might be influenced by people saying it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I think ultimately it is up to you. Maybe you can have a introduction classes where you sort of test it yourself, whether you like it or not. There are a lot of courses in a lot of places where you can do a 1 month or 2 month course or a 3 week, 2 week course. You sort of encounter architecture by your own self and then choose whether this works for you.
Did you have did you have a chance to do it yourself, or you just?
No, I just jumped on it. Interesting. Yeah, because the thing that I wasn't working, so I just jumped straight. That could also work.
Do you regret that?
No, I don't regret that.
Obviously. All right, Santhosh. It was great interviewing you, and thanks again.
Thank you so much, Tenor. I really appreciate that you are interviewing multiple people at GSAPP. I think it's crucial that someone curates our thoughts as we are studying. I'm very glad that you've taken up the role.
I'm happy to do that, and
more people should do it.
It is
very important.
It is. I'm happy to do this, and I'm also happy that you were the first one. You were the guinea pig.
I didn't know more people should do it.
So I think it went very successfully, and looking forward to.
You should also interview the professors.
Exactly. Yeah. Looking forward to that. Thank you.